My name's Quad, and this is Chunkwellard. He's my one chunk Iron Man. But this video isn't about him. What this video is about where he started his journey, the great city of Ardougne. Where did it come from? Who are the big players here? And why did it take us so long to figure out how to pronounce it? I called it Ardougne until I was a grown man. But it's not Ardougne, it's Ardougne. And I'm here to teach you the history of it. Now in the grand scheme of things, Ardougne is a relatively new city, only being founded in the year 7 of the 5th Age. We are currently in year 169 of the 5th Age, so the city is only 162 years old. Now that might sound like a long time, but to put it into context, Varrock was founded in the year 700 of the 4th Age, 1300 years before the founding of Ardougne. And in terms of the real world, 162 years ago was the American Civil War, and there was a whole lot of human history before then. Having said that, there's not much information of what the land was like before the founding of the city. We know from a book in the Prifddinas Grand Library that Baxtorian, an elven king, had a kingdom in the area during the early 4th Age, having expanded from Tiranwen in the west at least all the way up to the Baxtorian Falls, which is where the waterfall gets its name. This kingdom lasted 1900 years during the 4th Age. However, after Lord Iorwerth, an elven clan leader, seized control of Prifddinas, Baxtorian abandoned his kingdom through the underground pass in order to reclaim the elven homeland. In his absence, his kingdom collapsed, having been invaded by humans, presumably Zamorakian forces, however this is speculation on my part due to what happened next. But before we get too far ahead of ourselves, there is one more event that takes place around the Ardougne area that is worth mentioning, and that is the Battle of Plain of Mud, which was essentially a civil war between all the different tribes of goblins. Except the Dorgeshuun. They pieced out many years before, gone to live underground. I knew those guys were smart. This took place in the middle of the 4th Age, however a precise date is not known as most of the information comes from the Book of the Big High War God from the game, and goblins are not known for their record keeping. Also, bonus points if you can name any of the goblin tribes that aren't the Dorgeshuun, because I can guarantee you can't. I'm going to put them all on screen in a sec, so get your guesses in now. Those are the name of all the goblin tribes. I did not make any of those names up, and only one of them is a red squiggle in my script, Drogokishun, and the rest are all fine. So anyway, these goblin tribes went to war over food, or lack thereof, and this culminated at the Battle of Plain of Mud, which takes place just north of where Ardougne will be, in the Hemminster area. The battle raged on until one goblin, Hopespear, had a vision of Bandos, the god of the goblins, which led to the battle coming to an end. Now that we've gotten that goblin tangent out of the way, let's go back to my wild speculation. Presumably Zamorakian forces, however this is speculation on my part. So why did I say Zamorakian? Well, before the founding of the city, the last settlement known to be in the area belonged to the Marjorat Haziel, who was a zealot follower and ally of Zamorak, the god of chaos. And Haziel is someone who the adventurer meets in some of the quests in the game, but we'll get to that. So Haziel had established a settlement in the central Kandran area with his right-hand man, General Khazad, and his followers. So while there was some form of town or city here, it wasn't Ardougne. But that all changed in the year 7 of the 5th Age, when a group of peasants, who were followers of the god Saradomin, the god of order, decided that enough was enough and attempted to kill Haziel. These peasants were led by a man with the surname Carnelian, whose ancestors still inhabit Ardougne to this very day. Now, while Carnelian and his forces were successful in getting rid of Haziel, they could not kill him, due to the latter being a Marjorat, a very powerful race of beings. So instead of killing Haziel, they had managed to essentially put him into a coma and seal him away, with Haziel's followers being forced to flee into the sewers, where remnants of them still remain. So now that Haziel was defeated, the Saradominists established their own settlement, naming it Ardougne, after the river that flowed through Kandran, the Doine, which is also the longest river in Gielinor. Now, we don't know where the river got its name, but we do know that the river's name did come first. Thanks, Modash. Carnelian also built his mansion on top of where Haziel was sealed away, although whether he knew that was where Haziel was, is unknown. Now we jump forward a few years to the year 30 of the 5th Age, In this year, the Outpost was built, which is where the adventurer starts the Making History quest, but again, we'll get to that later. So the Outpost is built to protect Ardougne from the threats beyond the Arendar Pass, which leads to the Elven lands. But because the elves are having their own internal issues, they're not really interested in coming to Ardougne, and the area around the Outpost's biggest threat is hobgoblins, so the Outpost, with no real need to be used, was abandoned pretty quickly, and fell into disrepair. Unfortunately, we don't have any information on what happened for the next 64 years, with the next information we have coming from the year 94 of the 5th Age. It was in this time that Zamorakian forces took over the Outpost, being led by a powerful mage. It was used as a base of operations for the Zamorakians for their trouble-causing missions within Ardougne. The information on these missions comes from the journal of a Zamorakian named Drozel, who defected from Ardougne in this time, and who the adventurer finds the journal of during the Making History quest. These missions came in many different forms, some more extreme than others. There are 3 missions that we know about thanks to Drozel, however it can be assumed that many more took place between the years of 95 and 98, which were known as the dreaded years of tragedy. So, the missions we know about were poisoning the water supply with a strange concoction which caused everyone to break out in boils, stealthily setting fire to some people, and making all the children invisible. So it's clear to see that the missions varied from silly pranks to literal arson, and safe to say the people of Ardougne had had enough, and they called on a Saradominist army, led by a powerful mage, to deal with the Zamorakians. Now, if you were paying attention, you'll notice I said that both forces were led by a powerful mage. These mages actually used to be close friends, until one of them decided to become a follower of Saradomin, and the other turned to the dark side of Zamorak, and so the two fell out. And now these two old friends are about to fight to the north of Ardougne, near the Outpost, in what would come to be known as the Great Battle. While being called the Great Battle, it is believed that it was only a small number of combatants on each side, as Drozel mentioned that there was only him and 8 others at the Outpost, although I'm sure more people joined them before the Great Battle took place. So, the battle takes place, and it was a massacre. No record of what happened during the battle exists, however we do know that only 2 people survived the battle, those 2 people being the 2 mages, the Saradominist and the Zamorakian. It was at this point that the 2 put aside their differences and united under Guthix, the god of balance. And all it took was a complete destruction of their forces, but I digress. These 2 friends, now united, became great citizens within Ardougne, with one of them becoming the founder of the Ardougne market, which was also called the Equal Trade Market, and the other becoming king, in order to ensure a fairer society for all, although we don't know which was which. This king's line rules over the Ardougne to this very day, and in the year 101 of the 5th Age, the Ardignas dynasty began. So most of the history of Ardougne is now linked to the knowledge that we have of the kings of the time. So our first king is of course the survivor of the Great Battle, who came to power in the year 101. We don't know which side he fought for during the battle, but we do know that during his rule he was considered a fair and lenient king, and was well liked by his people. The same cannot be said for his son Naris, also known as the Mad King. No, not that one. But while being mad, he also cared about the literacy of his subjects. So much so, he is the inventor of Hangman in the world of Gielinor. So, the girl liked a good Runescape house party, right? Had 59 construction to build a hangman in his POH game room, right? Well, not quite. As old Naris decided that in order to give his citizens a bit more enthusiasm, he decided to use real people, with people being hanged and killed if the word could not be guessed in time. You do not want to invite this guy to game night. Thankfully, his heir, King Ulthus, was a lot more stable, and he was able to deal with issues in Kandrin with a lot more poise and decorum. Although, his decisions were not always popular with everyone. So in the year 132 of the 5th Age, King Arthur and his knights came all the way from England. Yes, that England. In the real world. So if the real world is canon in RuneScape, I think that makes you canon. Think about that. Anyway, Arthur comes to Kandrin and is looking for a castle in which to house himself and his knights. And there was such a castle that fit the description, however, it already belonged to someone else, Lord Sinclair. Thankfully for Arthur, both King Ulthas and Lord Sinclair agreed that the castle would be better off in the hands of the knights, and the castle was renamed to Camelot. Unfortunately, not everyone was happy with this decision. Now of course, the people that mattered agreed this was a good idea, but they forgot to consult someone. King Ulthas' eldest son, Prince Lathas, who claimed that his father was ousting the loyal subjects that previously lived there, although he kept these thoughts quiet at the time. Ulthas also did something else that irked his son. While Ulthas was deciding who should run the kingdom of Kandarin after his passing, instead of doing the normal thing that all other kings throughout history in Gielinor and the real world do and passing it down to his eldest child, he decided that he would split his kingdom between his two sons, Lathas and Tyrus, on the event of his death. This created even more resentment within Lathas, which eventually led to him joining forces with the Elf Lord Iowa in order to bring about the downfall of Camelot and the assassination of his brother. But we'll get to that. We're still talking about Ulthas for now. Unfortunately for King Ulthas, our next information about him is the nature of his death. In the year 136 of the 5th Age, Ulthas was killed while on a hunting expedition, where he was killed by a stray arrow. But wouldn't have wanted to be that archer. Upon Ulthas' death, his kingdom passed to his sons, with East Ardougne going to Lathas and West Ardougne going to Tyrus. Now, let's have a little look at what each of these brothers inherited from the city after their father passed away. We'll take a quick detour from the history of the city to talk about some important people and places within each half of the city, to get an idea of the state of the city before the arrival of the adventurer. So let's start in East Ardougne, of course ruled by King Lathas. But did you know that there's also a council in East Ardougne as well? I wouldn't be surprised if you didn't, as they are pretty useless and we only know of one member, Councillor Halgreave, who's responsible for public health and safety, although he is someone who the adventurer interacts with a few times throughout their time in Ardougne. There are also some titled characters based in the city, such as Lord Handelmort, the wealthiest man in the city, who the adventurer learns of in the tribal totem quest, although they never actually meet. There is also Sir Cyril Carnelian, descendant of the Carnelian who first founded Ardougne in the year 7, who is based out of his ancestor's mansion in the south of the city. The cult of Haziel is also still based under Ardougne in the sewers, although no one knows their exact whereabouts. One of the things that East Ardougne is best known for is its marketplace, used for thieving experience by everyone, founded around the year 101 and becoming a bustling hub for commerce across Gielinor. It has all kinds of stalls based there, from a humble baker's stall to the luxurious gem stall. The only named stall owner is Erin, the silver stall owner, who is the descendant of Drossel, one of the Zamorakians who took part in the Great Battle. Other features of East Ardougne include the zoo, which has a wide range of species including monkeys, penguins, parrots and even a cyclops, which is apparently classed as a wild animal in this world. There's also the Wizard Crompety, who will teleport the adventurer to the Rune Essence Mine after completing Rune Mysteries, as well as 2 separate banks for all your hoarding needs. So, East Ardougne is truly a hustling, bustling city. West Ardougne, conversely, does not have much hustle or bustle to it. Not only is it quarantined from the rest of the world, but there are only a handful of people that we even know about in the city. These include King Tyrus, who isn't even in the city in the current day, Bravek, the drunkard running the city in his place, and Chadwell, the only shopkeeper. Oh, Chadwell. Sorry about that. Besides the shop, the only real landmarks in the city are the civic office, where Bravek leads from, and a church with a cemetery that's overrun with zombies. So, what happened to this half of the city that caused it to fall into such disrepair? Let's rewind slightly. When King Tyrus took over West Ardougne in the year 136 of the 5th Age, the people accepted him, although he was not particularly well liked. I imagine people were expecting Lathas and got stuck with the younger brother, which no one wants. Still, under his rule, King Tyrus expanded West Ardougne to the mountains to the west, which in turn led to the rediscovery of the Underground Pass, around 200 years after Backstorian last used it. After discovering that the pass led to the elven lands of Taranwyn, Tyrus could not resist giving it an exploration, leaving West Ardougne in the hands of his subordinates, such as Bravek. So with Tyrus abandoning West Ardougne to explore Taranwyn, the city, without a meaningful leader, started to decline massively, meaning people hated Tyrus and the general morale of the city went down the drain. King Tyrus briefly returned from Taranwyn, but not to run the city or to do anything useful. He returned in order to resupply his army and to recruit new soldiers, after which he quickly disappeared back into the underground pass. This occurs roughly a year before the time of the adventurer, in the year 168. Shortly after Tyrus' second trip into the underground pass, it was corrupted by a newly resurrected Ivan, a self-proclaimed son of Zamorak, meaning that even if Tyrus wanted to come back from Taranwin, he couldn't. But the fact that Tyrus never even knew that the pass had been corrupted tells us he wasn't super keen on coming back to Ardougne anytime soon. After Tyrus had gone the second time, King Lathas was contacted by Lord Iorwerth, the elven clan leader who had taken control of Prifddinas. Remember him? Who offered Lathas an alliance. In exchange for Lathas' help in summoning the Dark Lord from somewhere within the underground pass, Iorwerth would destroy the Knights of Camelot for Lathas, who still held resentment for them after they took the castle from Lord Sinclair. So Lathas, being a bit of a bastard, agrees. It was around this time that a plague began to form in West Ardougne, and plague is in quotation marks there, as it wasn't actually real, something the adventurer finds out in their journey, and it was actually made up by King Lathas in order to quarantine the city. Lathas had the big walls around the city built, shutting it off from the outside world, and placed mourners in the city. These mourners were actually members of the Prifddinas Death Guard, led by an elf named Esselt, and they kept up the presence of a plague by spreading fake symptoms, including dyeing some sheep outside of the city multiple unusual colours. The mourners also kidnapped people who they claimed had the plague, and used them as slaves to mine for something called the Temple of Light, where the Dark Lord was supposedly trapped. Just as a side note, both Lord Iorwerth and King Lathas had different ideas as to who the Dark Lord was, with Iorwerth believing it to be Seren, goddess of the elves, and with Lathas believing it to be Zamorak. However, both would turn out to be wrong, as we'll find out later. So that leads us to the year 169 of the 5th Age. Ardougne is split, the west half is under quarantine, and the elves are slowly digging towards the Temple of Life. Under East Ardougne, an evil entity lurks in the sewers, waiting to be reawoken. But then along came an adventurer, in search of quests galore, who would change the course of Ardougne history forever. And that adventurer is you. So the way this section is going to work is I'm going to explain the adventurer's story in chronological order, based on the order in which quests came out, as that is the closest to how the quests play out in-world. So when the adventurer first comes to Ardougne, the quests to meet them are not the grandest. They could become a monk's friend by finding a child's blanket and sobering a man up, and they can fix the clock tower after its cogs are stolen by monsters. The third quest the adventurer looks into, however, is where things get much more interesting. Cyril Carnelian has had his family armour stolen by Hazeal cultists, and he tasks the adventurer with getting it back. Now this quest can go one of two ways. Either you side with Cyril, get his armour back, kill the leader of the cult, and get the butler fired for being a member of said cult. It's always the butler, isn't it? Alternatively, you cannot bother getting the armour back, resurrect Hazeal with a scroll hidden in the Carnelian's house, and poison a dog. The choice is ultimately up to the adventurer, but whichever they choose, Hazeal is eventually resurrected by the cult anyway, so I guess the choice is based on how you feel about dogs. After the adventurer is mingled with Hazeal, positively or otherwise, they start to become involved with the plague that is blighting West Ardougne. The first they hear of the plague is from Councillor Halgrave, who's having trouble with some infected sheep to the north of the city. They've escaped from a farm and he needs a brave soul to herd them and then kill them. The storyline gets more exciting later on, trust me. So the adventurer herds the sheep, kills them, and gets payment from Councillor Halgrave, stopping the spread of the plague. But just because they've stopped the spread of the plague doesn't mean that the adventurer is done with it at all. Their next encounter comes in the form of Edmund, whose daughter Elena went to West Ardougne in order to try to treat plague victims, but she hasn't been seen in days. So of course Edmund is worried, and the adventurer offers to try and find Elena. Upon investigating in West Ardougne, the adventurer learns that Elena has been kidnapped by some mysterious men and placed in a plague-ridden house. Once the adventurer gets into the house and frees Elena, they learn that she has collected some samples that she believes she can use to cure the plague. So both of them return to Edmund, who's very grateful that you've saved his daughter. Elena begins her research into a cure, and tasks the adventurer to help her out. Some of her equipment was taken by the mourners in West Ardougne, and she asks the adventurer to go and retrieve it. Once retrieved, Elena tests her samples and finds something odd, so she thinks she needs a second opinion. So the adventurer takes her samples and equipment to her old mentor, and he comes to the same conclusion. And that conclusion is, the plague is fake. Okay, we already knew that. I told you that earlier. But to the adventurer in the world, it was a big shock. So Elena tells the adventurer to go confront King Lathas about the plague hoax, and after some prodding, he admits that the plague is fake. but that he lied for the greater good. He tells the adventurer of how his brother took over West Ardougne and then became corrupted by the Dark Lord after going through the underground pass and joined his forces. And that is why King Lathas had to build the walls around West Ardougne, in order to protect the world from that evil. King Lathas then recruits the adventurer in order to stop King Tyrus and the Dark Lord, to which the adventurer agrees. Now, there is one small problem here that if you've been paying attention, and I hope you have, you will have noticed. And that is Lathas' lying here. Tyrus was not corrupted by the Dark Lord at all, he's just a bad king. But don't worry, we'll get back to Lathas being a little liar. The first thing that King Lathas wants the adventurer to do is to clear the underground pass and find a safe passage to the other side. The adventurer meets with the king's head tracker, Koftig, and begins to explore the pass. Throughout the exploration of the path, the adventurer kills a unicorn, kills some paladins, and ultimately finds a way to rid the underground pass of Ivan for good, and in the process, finds a way to the other side. Now, if you've done this quest, you'll know I just summarised a very long and frustrating quest in a few sentences. But with the pass cleared, King Lathas sends his mages in to cleanse the pass to make it safe to traverse, and employs the adventurer once again for their help on the other side of the pass. That help is to explore the lands on the other side, as well as performing a slight bit of regicide on old King Tyrus. But Lathas doesn't send the adventurer off alone. He has recently made contact with some elves, and they will help them on their journey of murder. Those elves are, you guessed it, Lord Iorwerth and his clan. Once the adventurer finds the camp that Tyrus is located at, Lord Iorwerth gives them Gillenor's version of the Anarchist cookbook in order to build a bomb to kill Tyrus with. After building said bomb, the adventurer places it onto a catapult near to the Tyrus camp and launches it into Tyrus' tent, exploding it and killing Tyrus. Upon telling Iorwerth that Tyrus is dead, he gives the adventurer a letter for Lathas, for the king's eyes only. On returning to Ardougne to give the letter to the king, the adventurer is intercepted by Arianwen, the leader of the rebel resistance against Lord Iorwerth. He casts a spell that allows the adventurer to read the letter from Iorwerth, which reveals that it is Lathas, not Tyrus, who is in league with the Dark Lord. This leads to the adventurer being recruited by the elves against Lathas and Iorwerth. After gaining the trust of the elves and the quest for roving elves, the adventurer begins to work with them in order to infiltrate the mourners in West Ardougne. The adventurer now learns that elves from Clan Iorwerth. Catch up, adventurer. We learned that 6 minutes ago. So the adventurer gets some mourner gear through a bit of murdering and infiltrates their headquarters in West Ardougne. The head mourner, Esselt, assigns the adventurers with keeping up the appearance of the plague, which involves dyeing the sheep that they themselves were burning before. Yeah, they didn't really have the plague. As well as poisoning some grain in order to give civilians plague-like symptoms. Once the adventurer has done that, they gain the trust of Esselt, who tells them that the mourner's plan is to dig under the mountain in order to find the Temple of Light, using the people of Ardougne as slaves while claiming they actually fell victim to the plague. With this information, the adventurer returns to the elves to tell them of this plan. The elves and the adventurer now make it their plan to stop the mourners from excavating the Temple of Light and finding a way to protect it from all outside influence. So the adventurer goes to speak to Essel, who gives them access to the tunnels leading to the temple. It turns out that the mourners had already discovered the temple, however the people that uncovered it were all killed by shadows, so Essel is unaware. The adventurer uses this to their advantage as they take a crystal from within the temple and take it back to Arianwen, who gets another elf, a Lunid, to enchant the crystal, and tasks the adventurers to take the crystal back into the temple, with the intention of sealing the temple off for another 1,000 years. What happens next for the adventurer is one of the most long-winded and annoying puzzles in all of Gillenor, deep within the Temple of Light, until they get to the centre of the temple, where they find a dwarf, Thorgal, and the Death Altar, the place used to create death runes. The adventurer charges the crystal that Alunid gave them on the altar, which they then return to its original place in the temple, sealing the temple off for another 1,000 years. However, it turns out Thorgal got into the temple by digging in from the underground pass, which wasn't covered by the Temple of Light's protection. But I'm sure it's fine. Essel won't discover this back entrance to the temple, right? Right? Well, we're going to have to find out later. We're going to take a little detour, as the next quest the adventurer tackles involves the Outpost to the north of Ardougne, the one I told you all so much about earlier in this video. In this quest, the adventurer learns much of the history of the Outpost, and with the historian Jorel, convinces King Lathas not to destroy the Outpost, instead turning it into a museum. Jorel also wrote a small history of the Outpost, where some of the information in this video comes from, as well as a small biography of the adventurer, the little cutie. Now that we've got that little distraction out of the way, we can return back to East Ardougne, where the adventurer discovers that Elena has been arrested for spreading around the fact that the plague is a hoax. The adventurer decides to rescue her, so with the help of Elena's dad Edmund, they create an Ardougne knight uniform in order to infiltrate the prison that Elena has been sent to. Once the uniform has been created, the adventurer rescues Elena, who then leads them to the headquarters of the Ardougne Resistance, which is based in West Ardougne. The Ardougne Resistance consists of Elena, Councillor Halgrave, whom we met earlier, and a few citizens from West Ardougne, and they've got a plan. They're going to whip up discontent within both sides of the city while dressed as either mourners or Ardougne knights, in order to turn the populace against King Lathas and overthrow him. Well, I say they're going to do it. I mean, the adventurer is going to do it on their behalf. Once King Lathas has been overthrown, the council can step in as interim rulers to lead the city. So the adventurer goes and does just that, telling the residents about new taxes they're going to have to pay, telling doctors and nurses they need to retrain, and setting fire to food supplies. All of this riles the people of Ardougne up, leading to a revolution, with the adventurer being right at the forefront. The revolution starts in West Ardougne, with the adventurer and the townspeople attacking mourners and leading an assault on the mourners' headquarters. Esilt is in the HQ during the attack, but manages to escape. After the mourner base falls, the revolution turns east and advances on the Ardougne castle in order to get King Lathas. Once Lathas' guards are dead, the king is found hiding in a wardrobe, where the adventurer and a few members of the resistance question him. He explains much of his motivations, which has already been laid out in this video, before he is taken away. King Lathas is taken to the Ardougne market, where he is summarily executed in front of all the citizens of Ardougne, thus putting an end to his reign. Unfortunately for the adventurer and Elena, they don't get time to celebrate, as they are knocked out by hooded figures and taken to Lord Iorwerth. Now a lot of this quest takes place in Taranwyn and not Ardougne, so I will be summarising it quite heavily. There's fighting, betrayal, and an even longer puzzle than in the Temple of Light, but one important thing that the adventurer does find out is that the Dark Lord is not Seren or Zamorak, which is what Iorwerth and Lathas believed, but a dark fragment of Seren that she had created from her own essence and the magic of the Death Altar. Before long, the adventurer finds their way into the underground pass once again, defending the back entrance to the Temple of Light that Thorgal and some of the other dwarfs had made. While defending this passageway, Elena is injured by Esilt, who the adventurer kills, before following after Lord Iorwerth, who had managed to make his way into the Temple of Light. Iorwerth manages to summon the fragment of Seren, who he still believes is Seren herself. While doing so, he is shot by Arianwen, while the adventurer is dragged into the fragment's realm, where, after a long battle, the fragment is defeated. Lord Iorwerth succumbs to his wounds, his last words telling the adventurer that he hopes they can live for themselves. Thus ends the story of the elves for now, their home of Prifddinas being open again, with the adventurer and Elena being the first humans to visit the Elven city. Now that the Elven quests are done, the adventurer is now back in Ardougne, where they've been asked to help with a murder investigation. The only problem is the victim is Cyril Carnelian. The adventurer does some investigating, which leads them to Haziel, who has now been resurrected whichever decision the adventurer made earlier, and his cult. While Haziel had nothing to do with the murder of Cyril, he is willing to find out who the murderer is. Upon investigating to the far north, the adventurer finds out that the murderer is an assassin with whom they had faced before, although they do not know their identity. It also seems like Cyril was possibly unfortunate collateral damage, and not the actual target of the assassination, although that is unknown. While there are a few other quests that take place partially around Ardougne, such as dealing with the penguins in the Ardougne Zoo, or capturing a ferret for a new exhibit in said zoo, that concludes all the major questlines in Ardougne as of the creation of this video. So, where does that leave us? So much has changed since the founding of Ardougne, especially in the time of the adventurer. So let's do a quick rundown of our major players. King Lathas and Tyrus are of course both dead, and their cousin, King Thoros, rules Ardougne now, and he is much less willing to talk to the adventurer than his predecessors, as he's currently trying to clean up his cousin's mess. The council, including Halgrave, are also helping to sort the city out. Edmund and his wife Alrina are both still living in their home in the north of East Ardougne, while Elena is now living in Prifddinas with the Malia clan, learning from them and growing her craft. The Carnelian family are trying to move on from the murder of their patriarch, but the murder of Cyril hangs over them. Haziel, having now been resurrected, has disappeared to the north, while his followers remain in the Ardougne sewers. West Ardougne is now open to the world, with people allowed to come and go as they wish, no longer under the control of the mourners or afraid of a plague that doesn't exist. And that is the history of Ardougne, from a field of mud to the great city that stands before us to this day. This city truly does have it all, and I want to thank you all for coming on this journey with me. If you enjoyed this video, let me know in the comments below, and maybe I'll make more history videos. So thank you all for watching, and I'll catch you all soon.